Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here. I hope you're having a good day. This week in class we were finishing up adding and subtracting mixed numbers. And then we started looking at what it means to multiply fractions, specifically multiply a fraction and a whole number. So what I did one day is we started off and we talked about what would it would look like if we had 4 kinds of pizza left and 1/3 of each kind of pizza. Now I can't replicate what we did in class because I don't have a smartboard here, but basically, this yellow hexagon would represent a whole pizza box, and this blue rhombus would represent 1/3 of a piece of pizza, or of a whole pizza. And so what we did is we modeled out what that would look like on the smartboard. And what we talked about that would look like is we said that would end up being 4 groups of 1/3, or 4 times 1/3. And then we talked about what that would look like in many different forms. So one way we talked about what it would look like is we talked about it looking like a number line. So on a number line, we could start at 0, and if we wanted to show 4 times 1/3, or 4 groups of 1/3, we would start at 0, and we would count up by thirds on the number line. We would do this 4 times, because we're counting up 4 groups of 1/3. So there's 1/3, and then another group of 1/3 would be 2/3, and then another group of 1/3 would be 3/3, or better yet, 1 whole. And then our 4th group of 1/3 would be 4/3, or better yet, 1 1/3. So this is what it looks like when you have 4 groups of 1/3, or 4 times 1/3. It's 4/3, or 1 1/3. So we looked at what that would look like with a number line. And then we looked at what the same thing would look like as repeated addition. So if we're talking about 4 groups of 1/3, we're talking about, so if we're talking about 4 groups of 1/3, we can also say 4 times 1/3. And if we're talking about that as addition, that would mean 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3. And we already know about adding fractions, right? The common denominator is 3. And we add up 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and we get 4/3, or that equals 1 1/3. Because 4 divided by 3, 3 goes into 4 one time, remainder 1 out of 3. So we could think of multiplying fractions like that. We did another question like this. Determine the product of 4 times 1/2 using a diagram, a number line, and an addition statement. So what we did is we said one of these red rectangles could represent 1 whole. And so if I wanted to figure out what 4 times 1/2 looked like, or better yet, 4 groups of 1/2, I could do this. I could take one red rectangle, and I'm just going to have to draw this. We were using smartboard tools for this. I could draw one red rectangle, and I could cut it in half, and I have 2 halves. Now I have to have a total of 4 halves. So to complete this, I have to do another red rectangle. And I'll divide that in half. Now I have 4 halves. I have what the question says, 4 groups of 1/2, 4 times 1/2. And what I have when I do that, I have 4 halves equals 2 wholes. Or better yet, just 2. So that's how that would look as a diagram. As a number line, so if we want to show 4 times 1/2, or 4 groups of 1/2, I start at 0 and I count up halves. there's 1/2. It's going to do that a little better. There we go. And then count up 2/2. That's 2/2, or 1/2. Count up another half. That's 3/2, or 1.5. And count up another half. That's 4/2, or 2/2. And that's how you get the answer of 2/2, or 4/2, because I've counted up 4 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, of 1/2. Now, probably the best way to understand this is by addition, right? If I'm talking about 4 times 1/2, I'm talking about 4 groups of 1/2, talking about 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2. Common denominator of 2, and 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 4. And this means 4 divided by 2. And this means 2. Okay, so these were all questions to understand what it looks like when we're multiplying a fraction by a whole number. And then what we want to do next is see if we can lead this into sort of a quicker way. So if I was going to determine the product of 2 times 5/6 using addition, this is what I would do. I would say, okay, 2 times 5/6, that means 2 groups of 5/6. So that means 5/6 plus 5/6. And I have my common denominator, so that means 10/6. And then I might reduce that fraction by dividing by 2, and that equals 5/3. And then I would take that improper fraction and know 3 goes into 5 one time, remainder 2/3. Now, a quicker way to do this is to do this. 2 times 5/6. But this 2 can also be written as an improper fraction. We could write this as 2/1 times 5/6. Now, 2/1 is the same as 2, right? 2 divided by 1 equals 2. So we can write this as 2/1 equals 5/6. Then all we do is multiply the 2 times 5 and the 1 times 6. And that gets us to 10/6. Same thing we had up here. And then that ends up getting us to 1 2/3. So that was what we were leading to, that we can think of a whole number multiplied by a fraction as addition, but we can also start to solve this just to get an answer by multiplying. I'm going to do one more video where we explore this some more. That's all for now. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.